what's the name of it? What do I tell people about the New World Order? When you're first finding out about it, um,
Oh yeah.
man, like last November, I was going nuts, man. It had been about 10 months, and I was like, I got to talk about it. I was talking to my in-laws and to my family, and it, my sisters still think I'm nuts to this day. But that really, well, actually, no. My youngest sister kind of has come around some. My older sis, not my older, the middle sibling. I'm the oldest. She really, she still thinks Katy Perry's a Christian, which is beyond. So, if you're listening to this, Hannah, I love you. Anyway, maybe we'll edit that part out there. But anyway, your video really, or that little 20-minute talk that you gave, really helped like refocus me and bring me back to like, hey, breathe. It's okay. You've got time to figure it out. Don't forget about the rest of the Bible. That's all there too. You know. um, so it was that was very good, and thank you for the work that you did, and that impacted my life. So I really appreciate that.
Well, I appreciate that, man. It's good to hear about that, and it's something that, I mean, all of us basically go through. There's all kinds of strained relationships out there because it's just, there's this time period, in the video I called short-term New World Order freakout syndrome.
Yep.
But, I mean, we've all gone through that and scared everybody around us until we sort of level out. And so I was hoping that we'll kind of speed the pace of the leveling out. It took me 2 years, and to level out. And my wife, who was my girlfriend at the time, was like, we pretty much gotta take a break here because this is, just too much for me, And so that, I mean, and by the time I came back, I was like all 100%, Jesus is the way to go. So but anyway, and I've talked to so many people at conferences and everything else that's a very common scenario. So I'm glad it helped. That's really encouraging.
The other thing I want to say thank you to you for, and I've told this to Gons, Letter Ulrich, a whole bunch of people, I mean, that that I've heard you talk to or be interviewed by. You all bring it back to Christ and the gospel. I mean, that's the center. That's really the important issue here, because we're talking about people's salvation. You're not trying to scare people into the gospel or fear monger them, if you will. It's, hey, all this stuff is going on. That's true, but it's all to keep you away from this guy. I love how you put it at the end of Age of Deceit 1. I may be misquoting you, but you owe it to yourself to find out who Jesus is according to the Bible. And I thought that was a really great way to put it. If you're actually taking a balanced approach to searching everything from the Nephilim to 9/11, you're going to start seeing a theme emerging of everyone is trying to keep you away from Christ. And you were just like, don't you think maybe you should look at it?
Yeah, that's really important. And I reminded of a quote early on when I was, identified probably more as a truther than I was anything else. But I remember some of the critiques from the other truthers was, Chris White is a pretty good researcher. If he wasn't so obsessed with Jesus, he'd probably be, really good. And I thought about that. I was like, I think I can deal with that. Obsessed with Jesus. That's okay.
I'll take that as a merit badge there.
Oh man. So, Chris, I've seen a bunch of your stuff. I mean, I've perused your channel, and I have some questions on a few different things regarding that. But first off, I was going to get some questions out of the way that I had from a friend. We interviewed him first couple episodes on our show, and but he had a couple questions for you because he also looks up to you as well. And here's the first question. He said, after short-term New World Order freakout syndrome has subsided, how do those aware of the New World Order introduce the subject to their churches and leadership in the churches?
Oh, that's a tough one. Well, I don't know. I think that for me now, I've got friends that still do it in the church that I went to when I was in Nashville. I was privileged to go there with some really great guys who some people know around the sort of conspiracy Christian circuit, Dr. Future and Tom Bionic.
Yeah.
And they still, they still try. In fact, Tom's on the staff there, so he's always trying to slip stuff in, and that's a good environment for them. I mean, they're pretty open to it, but they do it in a you got to be kind of savvy about it, because if that's all you want to talk about all the time and that's whatever, then it's just weird, and it's not doing anything good, because that's not what church is about. It's not the primary goal of churches is to be fellowship and making disciples of all nations, and that doesn't mean that it's not their goal to know what's going on, or to if something severe and is happening that they need to know it. For example, I would make sure to tell churches about stuff like the stuff that Russ talks about with how Satanist groups would send people in that look all churchy and stuff like that, but they're trying to get involved in the nurseries and stuff like that, and doing it as a part of some of their ministry goals, if you want to call it that, for the coven. And that's a very prevalent thing. And so I would send them some stuff about that, stuff that they needed to know. Now, when I first started, I was trying to, get them on board with 9/11 and whatever else, fluoride and aspartame and anything else I could think of, and it just kind of becomes wacky. So here's the issue, I think, is you gotta make sure it's relevant, because if it's just conspiracy, if it's something that they're doing wrong and can be corrected, that, like, for example, I don't know, the idea of saying that, kind of worshiping the church fathers, or not church fathers, but the founding fathers, it might be good to slip them one of Chris Pinto's films,
Yeah.
Or whatever. It's a case by case basis, and it's relevant, and it's not constant, and that should be easy for a person who's kind of settled to that place, and they are interested in and going to church to be discipled for the most part. I mean, I sometimes when I go to church, it's more about me doing a number of things. First of all, I'm there to be taught, not to teach, for the most part. And then I'm also there not just for myself, but to lift up other brothers in Christ, a primary thing, whatever I can do or whatever. It's something to do there. So if it falls in those contexts, of course, and in the individual conversations, you always find that guy in church who's like totally interested in the same things or whatever, and you guys can have your powwow and talk about thermite or whatever, and whatever. But it's important. But it's just a matter of choosing the right stuff that's relevant and doing it in a totally laid back way. And here's the reason: if it's important and they need to know it, you're only going to get results if you do it right. You're going to get rode off if that's all you're doing and jumping up and down screaming. Then you're just a crazy person or whatever. It might sink in 3 years later if they see something or whatever, but it's not effective if your goal is to affect change.
Yep.
Right. Yeah.
You kind of pretty much answered the other two questions, but I guess one of the other questions was, why do you think it is that the church is the most resistant to hear anything about the New World Order?
Well, I think that sometimes the New World Order stuff, depending on what is trying to be told, a lot of times, we have to realize that a lot of that stuff is not right too. I mean, of course, I believe the New World Order, exists and all this stuff, but there's all this sort of peripheral stuff around it. We might be really excited about, like, the Council of 300 or something like that, and I think that particular thing is, not true. But there's these little things that we might say that we're really particularly interested in it, that we need to make sure it's true first. Just because it sounds true and it's really cool, doesn't mean that it's true. So we got to make sure it is. And I think that we do ourselves a disservice sometimes when we are too quick to promote things that, within the true umbrella of the conspiracy world, kind of get slipped in some of that more fantastic stuff. We kind of lose credibility when we try to promote those things. But yeah, the church is resistant to even the true things a lot of times. But I think that you'd be surprised, really. It depends on the kind of things. I find personally that Christians are, even if they've never heard about any of this stuff, they're open to the ideas because ultimately the Bible is, saying that it's going to happen and various things about it. I remember talking to an old Christian woman. She must have been 80-something years old or whatever. Obviously never heard about the New World Order or whatever. But I was sort of in my New World Order freak-out syndrome, and I was just, going off, telling her all the stuff that was going on or whatnot. And she didn't bat an eye. I mean, she was like, yeah, that, kind of going, expanding on it a little bit. And just because she was a true, genuine Christian, she wasn't surprised that any of that was happening. I mean, as a true, genuine Christian and a person that knows their Bible really well, they're not going to be like totally against the idea that there could be some kind of nefarious stuff going on in government, because that's ultimately the way it's all going to go down in the end. They're ultimately anticipating it. I think that sometimes the issue is the church that you're going to the right church? I think the more biblically literate they are, the more open they're going to be to some of this stuff. But again, that's if it's done the right way and stuff like that. Nobody is going to like a guy who's one-track mind, New World Order. I got to talk to you about the New World Order again, because they're going to see that as this guy needs some discipleship. This guy is not in a good place.
Right.
This guy is not obviously very concerned about his, he or whatever. He's not acting like a person who is, in a right place. So they're thinking of it like every pastor that sees that scenario is thinking, I need to help this guy, because he's not in a good place and he's not trying to listen to what he's saying. So it's just counterproductive.
Right. I would flip that back though to say I've encountered churches, my home church, especially. They don't reject prophecy, but they don't teach on it. They don't talk about it. It's hush hush, and it's. I actually,
that's kind of what I meant by the right church, because prophecy is sort of the key that sort of lets all these things not be a big deal and
right.
In fact be biblical. And even if they technically are premillennial and they agree that this stuff is going to happen, but they don't teach on it, they don't think about it, they don't really know much about it, it's still they're vulnerable to believing all kinds of who knows what about prophecy. I mean, there's certainly enough of that going on, which would preclude any of the stuff that we're talking about. And the idea, prophecy is considered by a huge number of mainstream churches to just not be not only not pay attention to, but like actively believe that it's heresy to believe in premillennialism, which is ridiculous. But it's the prevailing view among most mainline denominational churches, and especially in a lot of the higher criticism stuff in the seminaries. So when you got that kind of stuff going on, which is your odds are that's going to be the kind of church that you're dealing with. They don't have any biblical basis to agree with this stuff. So that becomes a problem.
So let me just ask you, what do you think if your pastor of the church that you're attending came up, which I'm sure isn't the case, but if they did come up and they were talking in reference to prophecy, saying that, well, we've been in, the last days since Jesus, since the crucifixion and Jesus rose again. So in using it almost like kind of a way to deter us from even thinking about that prophecy.
Right. Well, there's a lot of different doctrines that will say something similar to that, ultimately to say, that we don't really need to pay attention to the prophetic portions. They are not literal. We can allegorize them and stuff like that, depending on the severity of that doctrine, which in something like that, what you just said is something I technically believe too. We, theologically speaking, we're in the last days and have been since then, but that's just one way to sort of look at the term theologically last days. But in another sense, the things that Jesus predicted, the things that are spoken of in the New Testament, are clearly something that is a future event and that kind of stuff. And so anyway, there's a lot of that kind of stuff going around. particularly preterism, partial preterism, huge amounts of that stuff. So anyway, if they say, for example, that, look, all the stuff that Jesus was predicting in the Mount of Olives or the Book of Revelation, that all happened in 70 A.D., that's generally the doctrine, then I'm out of there because... And look, I take what I can get with in terms of prophecy. I don't expect a church to believe what I believe in prophecy or whatever. I take a lot of liberties with prophecy, but
right.
in what the churches believe, and if I'm willing to go there.